In terms of soundtrack, Chamber of Secrets is pretty well on par with the first game, if not probably my favorite addition to this game, full stop. And Harry Potter game was in some way improved, some of it more than others, and it's because the explorative elements are much stronger in Chamber of Secrets.
Shit, not this time, bitch! Expelliarmus! Shit. Yeah, that's broken.
Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Now that's a name that brings me back. Normally I don't like to give prerequisites for my videos as I like them all to stand on their own, but if you want my general impressions on the Harry Potter series at large, check out my Philosopher's/Sorcerer's Stone PS1 video.
What?
But in short, it was a major part of my life between the ages of 4 and 14, and something that I don't think will ever truly be replicated, with the feeling of growing up with these characters in real time being something that really separates it from other franchises, as well as what makes it something that requires you to have had been there as it was going on to really have gotten the full effect as I did. Though to be fair, I never read the books, unlike my entire family, but it's long since passed and those feelings have long since faded into my memory, as has my interest in the entire series. Come at me, bro. As far as the movies go, and this is possibly a controversial opinion, I personally think that Chamber of Secrets was the best one, plus I never really liked Prisoner of Azkaban. Like, at all. It's hard to really put my feelings about Chamber of Secrets into words, exactly why I think it's the best. I'll say it like this. On one hand, the movie felt like it had very palpable stakes, with the petrification, the secret chamber with the Basilisk, the threat of Hogwarts itself being shut down. It was all solid stuff with massive world-changing consequences on the table, but on the other hand, solid stuff contained in this movie, so you didn't have to rely on outside sources to get invested in the movie for the most part, which is something that later movies and maybe the books as well failed at. This was a very complete package. Aside from that, the tone was more consistent than the later movies, the special effects were mostly on point, as was the acting. It also had the distinction of scaring the absolute shit out of me when I was younger. It legitimately gave me nightmares. Overall, I found it to be a vast improvement over the first movie, and the best movie in the series overall, and the same can be said about the video game tie-in on the PS1. This is definitely one of the games I remember getting on Christmas Day 2003, a day that essentially changed my life forever. No hyperbole whatsoever. It came out on November 5th, 2002 in North America, and just like the first game, the PAL version came out on the same day the movie came out in theaters, November 15th, 2002. It came out for multiple platforms, but the PS1 version is the one that I grew up with, and by 2002, the PS1 was on its deathbed, so having anything even slightly worth playing by this point in its life cycle was an accomplishment in itself. And while with the first game I didn't really remember anything beyond little bits and pieces, with this one I remember much more, and what I remember is that pretty much from top to bottom, it was much better than the first game.
So let's take a look at Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets on PS1, one of the first PS1 games I played. Also known as Harry Pothead and the Chamber of Weed. Starring Hermione. I waited 11 years to tell that joke, and it gets no reaction. Shiv me with a fucking Wiimote. Vidius Startus.
So this game, just like its predecessor, was developed by Argonaut Software. Yes, this Argonaut Software. What a difference 9 years makes. But then again, 11 years made an even bigger difference. So I'd say they were hanging on just fine at this point. It's hard to really talk about this game without consistently comparing it to its predecessor, but for what it's worth, not everything is better, but many of the aspects that I felt improved this game from its predecessor partly has to do not just with better design, but also the self-contained universe at large. So we get right into the gameplay with very little having to be skipped over, because the aspects of the story that could be turned into gameplay start very early on. In fact, the bulk of the gameplay starts once you get to the burrow, so right from the beginning, the pacing feels a lot better, and nothing feels like it has to be truncated. Oh dear God!
Jesus Christ! You two look like you fell down the uncanny valley and hit every rock on the way down.
I guess that's as good of a transition as any. Well, this game is just as ugly, if not uglier than the previous game. It still has all of the previous issues, like the character models being so jagged and low quality that every character looks malformed like they're monsters out of some low-rent horror movie. Facial tearing is still intact, and facial animation is unacceptably bad, even by the standards of the PS1, where it's essentially just 2 frames of animation, one where the mouth is open and one where it isn't. Half the time it's hard to tell what you're even looking at when encountering a new enemy or general character. The animation in general can be downright atrocious even for basic things like walking, etc. The environments on the other hand, minus a few outliers, actually look more lively this time around, so it's actually more rewarding to navigate. The burrow, for starters, is a consistently beautiful level. The castle as a whole feels much more like a giant castle as opposed to a series of corridors like it did in the last game, and the Forbidden Forest. I mean, damn. I don't think I covered thoroughly enough how much I love the Forbidden Forest in these games, and the skyboxes in many of these areas are quite pretty. You only really see them when you're outdoors, obviously, but the bright sunny sky really is beautiful. Resolution be damned. In fact, there's this one that I'll talk about later that's so beautiful it changed my perception of the game. The frame rate is even more consistent for smoother action. Fucking sweet. Back to complaints. A problem unique to me is that you don't really get anything as inspired or creepy as the dungeons from the first game. Even when you do get into the dungeons in this game, they're too brightly lit, lively, and colorful to really invoke any strong emotion. The Death Day party in general is ironically too lively, and the scariest part doesn't even take place during the party.
Christ on a hot tin roof, wear a fucking belt.
Overall, however, the environments on average are more consistently appealing than before, just with the highs not being quite as high. The trade-off, as you saw before, was that the storybook cutscenes have taken a massive quality hit because they abandoned the full cartoon aesthetic in favor of trying to integrate CG graphics into them, which is very misguided because, as we know, much of this game once in gameplay is ugly as sin, and so half of these storybook cutscenes look like they're from a badly written creepypasta. Like, mark my words, this was the last thing someone saw before they died. Dun 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 dun! I'm not kidding when I say this, but the CG game over screen used to scare the shit out of me. Almost as much as the spider from the actual movie. Also, I'm not sure if this is a glitch unique to my copy, but I had this frequent graphical glitch where half the screen would suddenly disappear, giving you a view of the reverse level, which is a particularly annoying glitch. It usually happened during dialogue scenes, and you know what? I'm just gonna say it, I don't think the atmosphere is as strong in this game. Oh, it's still there. And especially in the secret castle areas. Don't get me wrong, the atmosphere is generally good, but I feel like they ruined the atmosphere in a lot of these environments. I feel like it doesn't come across as strong as before because sometimes it's too loud and obnoxious for me to get immersed. And otherwise, there's something intangible that's missing that makes the atmosphere not quite as strong. Like, there's something about this path that isn't quite as atmospheric as something like the intro area from the last game. And that's a shame because that was the big highlight last time around, but that's not to take away from the overall quality of the atmosphere here because not as good is still good, and when it's good, it's good. As I showed earlier, I just feel let down after the last game where the atmosphere was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Texture warping is still as bad as ever, and I need to clarify once again that, yes, I know that texture warping was synonymous with the PS1, but the Harry Potter PS1 games were particularly egregious for that. It's some of the worst I've seen on the PS1, let's get that out of the way right off the bat. Overall, this game does look pretty ugly. In fact, let's not mince words, it's very ugly, but it does have some bright spots. Different bright spots than before, but bright spots nonetheless. Atmosphere, as I said earlier, is still a particular highlight in spite of not being as strong, and of course that extends into the auditory as well. In terms of soundtrack, Chamber of Secrets is pretty well on par with the first game, if not better. It's a very classy soundtrack that's subdued enough to be atmospheric and ambient, yet the instrumentation is still high quality, and so subdued or not, it's still enjoyable to listen to. Jeremy Soule reprises his role as the lead composer behind this game, the man responsible for soundtracks in series such as Guild Wars, Dungeon Siege, and the Elder Scrolls series among many other things. He specializes in classical and orchestral music, and by golly gee is he talented. It's just a series of very pleasant sounding pieces that really work with the mysterious nature of the castle and the exploration of it. I can't say enough good things about it. I mean, the main theme sounds a bit sinister, especially with the lightning strikes. But then you have such standouts as the absolutely whimsical burrow theme, the glorious lower castle theme, or even something like the castle grounds. This game's soundtrack actually does pick up more consistently than before. As in, it actually picks up at all, such as with the Quidditch training theme. Or the slug catching game. It's a positive and a negative because upbeat music takes away the subtlety, but it also fits the theme much better, and one thing that I appreciate is that this game knows when to pull back and let the game sound effects play without music, because that's when this game is at its most atmospheric. A secondary benefit is that it means that even though all of these pieces are generally short and there isn't an overwhelming amount of them, they never get tiring through repetition, so the soundtrack gets 2 thumbs up from me. So far, pretty much everything is on par with or better than anything that came before it, and that theme continues as we move forward. I should mention before I go on that it may seem weird to analyze the narrative in a tie-in game when in theory a tie-in is only as good as the thing it's tying into as far as the story goes, and that's pretty much true, but when converting something to a video game there are many aspects that get changed or lost in translation, and it's worth taking a look at how it differs from the other versions of the media it's tying into and determining whether it's to the game's benefit or detriment. If you like the Chamber of Secrets movie or book, you'll find many of the aspects of the story you like intact here, which is generally true for me, so it's not worth looking at the ways it's similar, only how it differs. That's what we're going to be taking a look at here. So yeah, as far as the story in the game goes, once again it's pretty well identical to the other versions of the media, so any complaints about that would be complaints with the greater story. So you know how this goes: new year, warning, escape, burrow, stolen car, whomping willow, etc. But are there any significant ways this version differs from its predecessor? I'd say there are a few. One of my major issues with the first game is, for whatever reason, they made Harry into such a reactionary non-character and a borderline silent protagonist, but they actually addressed that issue in this game by giving him some goddamn dialogue and agency in the story other than cleaning up after everybody else without even the slightest bit of objection or even general comments, no matter how dangerous or outlandish the task at hand is. They still don't really capture the charm or personality that Harry had in the movie or the book, but the fact that he even has any personality whatsoever is a welcomed change from the previous game. Another thing I like is that there's a sense that everybody exists outside of the direct influence of Harry. When they go over the ingredients they need for the Polyjuice potion, they actually go out of their way to make it seem like Harry isn't the only proactive one getting the ingredients. You do get the majority of them, but the others actually put the legwork in. Hell, there are even times where they go out of their way to establish why Harry's the sole one doing certain things, which usually comes down to Ron being incompetent, like when he ate shit.
Roll the sound effects.
And you know what else they have? Actual plot-building flavor dialogue. They didn't need to put it in, but it actually does a really good job to further the stakes while individualizing NPCs, so Hogwarts actually feels like a living, breathing school of more than faceless, nameless fuckwads unlike before. The pace is even better. There are still a few arbitrary time jumps, but they actually make sense. A majority of the game takes place between September and Halloween, and then they time jump a few times, but they're also time jumps that make sense where there couldn't be gameplay. I mean, they're generally the same time jumps as the other versions of the story, but either way, the pacing actually feels much more natural than it did in the last game, where there's genuinely significant time that passes throughout the game, but they still managed to hit all the beats that they needed to while cutting out all the aspects they needed to for gameplay and adding bits that made sense otherwise while feeling natural. You genuinely feel the time that passes, and the game has substantially less flags. Gameplay progresses because of the story beats rather than, like in the first game, the arbitrary collection of random objects and glorified scavenger hunts. They even establish why the castle is so hostile towards Harry. Short answer, Dobby's a prick. Seriously, it actually feels like they went out of their way to address all of the issues I had with the first game and fix all of them. That's pretty much every problem I had fixed. Except for one. The voice acting. The voice acting is still 50 Shades of AIDS and really takes away a significant amount of seriousness from any scene that's played.
Leave him alone! He didn't want all that. Ron, it's only a word.
Yeah, but that word's the most insulting thing he could think of.
All they'd have to do would be to follow the spiders. That'd lead 'em right. That's all I'm saying.
It's painfully amateurish. They sound like they're just reading off the script and putting absolutely no effort into it. Either they don't know how to present their voice, or they just don't care. Maybe they just had terrible voice direction. The end result is that this is some of the worst voice acting I've ever heard. They use much of the script from the movie, as is customary, which is why it's so jarring to hear lines like this.
It's not much, but it's home. I think it's brilliant.
Spoken like this.
It's not much. I think it's brilliant.
I think it's brilliant. I'm 5 years old.
Once again, it's just a case of probably hiring people who've barely done voice acting in their lives to fill the role. It was probably a last priority. Why hire talented people when you could just get people that sound like they're just waking up from an anesthetic overdose or like they've been beaten over the head with the business end of a car? Surprisingly, one of the standout voice actors in this game is the guy who played Oliver Wood. Not only does he sound like the person who played the same character in the movie, the actual voice acting isn't half bad.
Whichever team's seeker catches the golden snitch scores 150 points for their team.
Oh, and by the way, I checked, he's actually uncredited, so I don't know who played it. Maybe it was the same guy from the movie. They also got a new narrator, and he's not half bad either.
After 10 noisy, rocky minutes, the trees thinned and the car stopped so suddenly they were nearly thrown through the windscreen.
I had the urge to look up who did the narration because I could swear I recognized his voice, and it's none other than the British national treasure himself, Stephen motherfucking Fry. How'd they swing that? I guess I know at least where the budget went. I also had the urge to check out the other voice actors, and half of them had maybe 5 roles or less beyond these games. That really shows. Beyond the voice acting, I guess there are also some baffling changes, such as the taps in the bathroom turning into snakes. They also established that Ron's wand was acting up, but they never get around to establishing why. Within the context of the game, it just comes out of nowhere, and the one thing that always stuck out to me is that when Harry is speaking in Parselmouth in this version, for some reason he just speaks in English.
I'll try. Open!
I don't understand why. It just seems like an odd change when they could have easily just copied the lines from the movie. Maybe the voice actor had trouble saying those lines? Actually, I wouldn't be surprised. I think they truncated a lot of Lockhart's personality. They get across his arrogant attitude and kind of his cowardice, but they never get across his fraudulent nature. That can actually be said about many of the characters in this game. They have significantly more personality than they did before, but before they were just nameless faces that existed pragmatically, like for tutorial purposes, so any personality whatsoever is a step up. Malfoy is still a hyper-exaggerated caricature of himself to the point of practically being a Saturday morning cartoon villain, which comes across as stilted and unreal. Say what you will about Malfoy in the movies, at least he was human. Funnily though, many of the people who had similar issues in the previous game were cut out or minimized. There's very little Snape, very little Filch, very little Dumbledore, and so on. Come to think of it, I don't think you ever see Dumbledore in the entire game beyond the storybook cutscenes. To be honest though, that's pretty much the worst of it. The aspects they changed from the base story when taking the first game into account, pretty much everything is improved. Improved from the first game, that is. There's still a somewhat lack of personality to many of the characters to the point that I'd have no idea who most of them were had they not been in the movie. There's still a bunch of subpar dialogue, some of the changes are baffling, and so on and so forth. While improved, it's still not great, but it's at least acceptable, and beyond that, whatever you already liked about the story to begin with is still there, so if you like Harry Potter, you'll still get a kick out of this.
Yay, redundancy!
If not though, you may find the voice acting grating and the characters weak, and if you're not into Harry Potter, then, well, I question how you got this far to begin with. So once again, the base gameplay is held up by 4 pillars: collection, exploration, platforming, and combat. The collection is based around Bertie Bott's Every Flavored Beans, as well as the famous Wizards and Witches cards. The collection of course ties into the general exploration of the castle. The platforming also ties into this, but it mostly ties into the moment-to-moment gameplay, as the level design of this entire castle is built for platforming challenges. Finally, the combat also ties into the moment-to-moment gameplay and is built around the spells. As before, this game is a slightly uncommitted collectathon because there are hundreds of Bertie Bott's Every Flavored Beans around the castle, but there's no real obligation to collect them. There are benefits for collecting them, but well, more on that in a minute. The other half of the collecting are the famous Wizards and Witches cards. These are generally the big rewards you're given for doing all the major side content in the castle, but the funny thing about these cards this time around is that before, in your Folio Magi, they were big pictures that came with a bunch of flavor text that tells you about the larger universe. Sure, you can get this from the books or the wiki, but it was nice to get this cool lore from these cards for people who maybe aren't as knowledgeable on the Harry Potter series. Coupled with the cool artwork, it felt like a proper tangible reward for people doing the side content, but here they decided to make the famous Wizards and Witches cards tiny little things on a menu and made the explanations just a few words each. So one of the few things the first game did better than the second is that the rewards you get for exploring the castle in the first game felt like actual rewards, plus it's not even very interesting facts.
Edgar Struger, inventor of the sneakoscope.
Thanks for the 5-word summary.
Though Harry is a bit of an egotist.
Harry Potter, the boy who lived.
Oh look, it's some old guy over here. Oh my god, it's me! Dude, don't get excited, alright? You're the boy who lived. Your claim to fame is that you're still alive. Alright, even I've managed that. Although I am also a bit of an egotist. And one of my many nicknames growing up was Harry Potter. Holy shit!
The same disinterest from the cards goes for the beans as well. The issue with Bertie Bott's every flavored beans in this game is that they stop being useful very quick. In the last game, while the rewards weren't too useful, they at least inspired you to keep collecting from beginning to end because every color built into the next reward. They actually inspired you to keep collecting. They gave you something to keep working towards the entire game. Here, all of the beans build into the same reward, buying Wizards and Witches cards from Fred and George in the common room, but once you have all of the cards, the beans cease to be useful. You only need to get 250 to bleed them dry, and I had that before I even got to the common room. You could have at least made them proportionally more expensive so they felt more rewarding to get. Otherwise, I question why even bother having the beans in the game to begin with if it's so terribly balanced. If they just let me into the sorceress's lair instead of making me get 90 eggs, I'd question what was even the point to begin with. But then there's something so satisfying about collecting these beans even when you don't need to. Maybe that's just my collectathon instincts coming back to haunt me. Like, I'm pretty sure there's something wrong with me. I just can't leave an environment until I have nothing left to get, even the functionally useless. Also, that collection sound effect never gets old. And they have so many different designs that I guess I just feel like each one is a new one to collect. Regardless, these aspects of collection don't really bother me that much because the explorative elements are much stronger in Chamber of Secrets. Even though I loved the feeling of the explorative nature of the first game, it's no secret that the layout of that particular world felt very video gamey. Like I said earlier, a series of corridors meant to sell the game rather than a virtual environment, so it felt like you were being railroaded in a sense, and the castle felt like only what needed to exist was there, so it felt like very little actually existed in this series of small corridors they call the castle. Like, for example, the upper castle was just like 4 rooms and 1 class, and also one of those 4 rooms happened to be the portrait room, so very little actually went on in the upper castle, and this was supposed to be the biggest and most important part of the castle. In Chamber of Secrets, they completely overhauled the layout of the castle, and now it feels like this place that could actually exist, and in being organic feels much more satisfying to explore as if it were a tangible place that could exist. These environments are vast, and they weave into each other gracefully, and I enjoy playing around in them quite a lot, but moreover, this game is much more non-linear than the first game. Now, I didn't realize how non-linear this game was until this playthrough, but when I was supposed to go to Quidditch practice, I decided to go the other way, and there were tons of dead ends that have no reason to exist in the castle grounds, like the mutant eggplants.
And now I've seen it all.
And even a few optional minigames that exist for the sake of themselves. It kind of reminds me of Max Payne 2. Honestly, Max Payne 2 is easily my favorite game in that particular series because one thing I love in my games are developers creating worlds with people and things to interact with that have no purpose other than fleshing out the world. In particular, there's this series of levels in Max Payne 2 where you're locked in Max's apartment building and you have to find a way out. You end up getting help from other tenants of the apartment building, there's a bunch of optional rooms to explore, and I remember one part where you can just walk into somebody's room and turn off his TV and he'll just say something like, yeah, I should probably go to bed anyway. The building felt like a real place that people live in. I like linearity because I like structured experiences, but I also like linear games that use aspects of non-linearity to make the game world feel more real. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets on PS1 certainly has that going for it. Just aimlessly wandering the castle grounds is fun, and seeing and exploring little areas like this that feels like nobody's ever seen it has all of the qualities synonymous with enjoyable exploration. It's not the biggest game world, but it still gives me the urge to roam around. The structured exploration is also there with the challenge areas where you might find the Wizards and Witches cards, and these are rewarding to stumble across. They're little challenge areas with varying levels of skill needed to get past, and they're usually built really well. Plus, they got rid of the idiotic minigames from last time that spanned most of the challenge areas. Here, it's almost all platforming all the time, with long, structured challenges that feel rewarding to complete. Once again, almost as if they were reading my mind from the future, though there are other issues like with the secret areas that require the Vertimilius spell. There's exactly one point where you can use the Vertimilius spell before being locked into the ending scenario, so the spell as well as these sections felt shoehorned, like they had to find a use for the spell. The platforming in this game, both in secret areas and for general progress, is still as good as ever. The jumping is very responsive. You automatically jump as soon as you run off a ledge, and the ledge grab is very generous. The platformer level design is well made. The challenges are meaty and frequent, as in all over school. It's a really great system. The highlights as far as the platforming is concerned are probably the sections where you need to race towards class. There's a record to strive towards, it requires finesse, and is quite consistently meaty throughout. There are plenty of other platforming challenges in this game, but these are the best of them. Some challenges are also very obscure, making them all the more fun to conquer. Plus, there's one addition to this game that makes the platforming and gameplay in general significantly more smooth. Actual dual analog camera control. Holy shit, What a concept!
We've sustained adequacy! Woo, yeah! Woo, yeah, we did it!
So that makes the platforming, the exploration, and I suppose the gameplay in general way more enjoyable and less fiddly at a moment-to-moment basis, which also helps during the obligatory returning forced stealth section. So let me be clear that while it was better than it was in the first game, the forced stealth section is still pretty bad here. It breaks the pace, it's obnoxious because it's too easy to get caught from somebody you didn't see and too hard to gauge what a character's range of sight is, and if you get caught, you have to go back several areas depending on where you get caught, meaning you could end up replaying the same areas over and over to get another chance at the harder areas later on. The last area is a real hassle in the asshole because you have to get through a timed gate via foot-activated pressure pad, but there's no way to see if the coast is clear to make a break for it, so you're relying on blind luck. The timing is really slim too, so there's no waiting for teachers to pass. It's just a series of dick kicks. Just like every other example ever, the forced stealth here is half-assed and a load of ass. Ironically. So the base gameplay has some drawbacks, some pretty big drawbacks, but overall is a vast improvement over the first game. If there's one thing that I take issue with, it's the fact that the house points, which were already useless in the last game, are even more useless in this game. They seemingly only put it in for the sake of obligation, but it's so contextual and pointless. Ironically. Again, no matter what happens in the game, no matter how many points you get, you always win without fault.
Gryffindor are in the lead on house points. Gryffindor.
Yes, what about Gryffindor? Go on.
There's no reward for it. It's all done for its own sake, and let me tell you, they got very generous with the house points this time around, to the point that by the time I got to the first point tally, I ended up with 490 points. Too much for them to even put in the hourglass. I don't like sand, it's coarse and rough and dooba-dooba-doo. And by the end of the game, I actually had so many points that they physically couldn't put any more in the hourglass and it just stopped. So what's even the point of having house points? Couldn't they have at least integrated the concept into some clear end goal type thing? So house points are useless, the every flavor beans are useless almost instantaneously, and the famous wizards and witches cards aren't as fun to get, so the rewards for general completion and exploration have almost no benefit. But I suppose one could argue that the act of getting them is more fun on average than before, which is true, and that could be enough, which it is, but it's still disappointing for what it could have been. As for the combat, well, it is what it is. You press the X button and enemies in front of you have a tendency to disintegrate, but I'd like to introduce you to where the combat is really showcased. Probably my favorite addition to this game, full stop. And it's something that builds on top of the combat mechanics and takes it to its logical extreme in a really fun game mode. That is to say, the Wizard Duels. Basically, two wizards stand opposite on the battlefield and have to launch spells at each other until one person runs out of health, and I love it. There's always a spot on the battlefield that, if shot by the opposing player, will release a special power-up that could be one of any number of different special attacks. It's actually a really fun game mode that takes advantage of the combat mechanics in a way that the first game never did. So you have to dodge attacks and time your shots to land them for maximum impact, and you can hide behind your obstacles and be a cheap bitch, but you can't hit your opponent until you're in the open, leading to a great risk-reward system. If you're charging your attacks, you won't move as fast, leaving you open. It's a mix of a bunch of subtle ingredients that makes for an intense and very exciting time. There are multiple arenas throughout the game, including the House Champion duels that all vary in subtle but important ways, and thankfully those ones can be played and replayed as many times as you like, a good thing because this mode, while simple in concept, is so fun that I would honestly play an entire game based around it. Even to this day, I consider it the highlight of the game. Best part is, it's not some gimmicky minigame like so much of the last game. It actually builds on core mechanics. I'd say it makes the rest of the game worth it because the combat honestly doesn't come up as much outside of this mode, and it never feels as satisfying as it does in the mode built around combat. At most, you'll come across sentient knights that you have to put in their place, so it's more situational than useful. It feels like they have to contrive a way for you to use your knockback jinx in a lot of these circumstances, though the possessed appliances like the washing machine boss and the lawnmower at the burrow made sense and were really well done, so some of the combat in regular gameplay is good. It especially makes sense in the Forbidden Forest. Otherwise, the actual combat in the castle always felt kinda contrived, like it's there because it needs to be there, as if there's some mandatory combat quota rather than letting the level design and story justify it, so it's contrived, kinda like the other spells. Of course, the standard Flipendo is this game's go-to for many moment-to-moment needs, but this game also has the Wingardium Leviosa, Incendio Vertimillious, as well as Petrificus Totalis, but I'm all but certain that Petrificus Totalis doesn't get used once outside of the level where you learn it. As for the other three spells, they fit in where they need to and do the job they need to just fine. You need to levitate something, you use the spell that levitates. You need to light something on fire, you use the spell that lights things on fire. Vertimillious at least opens up some platforming challenges and has a timing aspect as it wears off after a set amount of time, but beyond that, there's no real reason why you have to summon platforms at all. Hell, even the collapsing platforms that appear didn't need the spell to be collapsing platforms. So what's the point of even needing to summon them other than having some arbitrary stumbling block between you and your destination? I mean, at the very least, I'll say Herbology class is fun. Hell, I'll even say that the class where you learn Petrificus Totalis is even pretty fun, but these are sectioned out parts of the game built around these spells, so they had to be good. Otherwise, these spells are little more than a glorified use key and door puzzle, as they require no skill or thought, and the game automatically uses the spell you need to, taking away any guesswork. So the spells for general progress don't really add anything, and wouldn't have even needed to be added had they not been necessary to tie this game into the larger universe. At least the mini-games to get the spells are a little bit more meaningful because they challenge you to get a good grade to get the cup. It's still a glorified QuickTime event sequence, but at least they give you a reason to try, if anything. Wow, Professor Sprout looks pretty different.
Man, time hit her like a freight train.
But there is one thing that puts these spells above the spells from the last game, and it's exactly what I said they should do. They took away those bullshit-ass minigames to do certain spells. Now to do a spell, all you need to do is go up to the indicator and press X. That's it. Hallelujah. So the spells are at the very least inoffensive, but I suppose that if you're a fan of the larger universe, you'll get a kick out of using these spells, but I personally need more than that. I'd prefer if there was some level of thought I had to put in, clever puzzles and whatnot. But alas. Overall, though, I think this game is a vast improvement in the moment-to-moment based gameplay. Almost everything that was subpar about the first Harry Potter game was in some way improved, some of it more than others, and it feels like a much more refined, enjoyable version. I don't think it's some grandiose masterpiece, but for what it is, the base gameplay is a fun romp. But those who fail to learn from their past are doomed to repeat it. Just like the last game and games of this era in general, it's a hard game to nail down in terms of genre, and a lot of that has to do with the developers seemingly throwing shit at a wall to see what stuck, and the end result is you end up with a bunch of disconnected gimmicky game modes, but they did at least learn a bit from their history, so there's fewer minigames, and they vetoed the really shitty ones from last time. The first one you end up with is right at the beginning of the game, where you catch pipes in a bin which makes a ghoul vanish.
I feel like that was a Mad Lib.
There's nothing to this, you just move the D-pad back and forth and catch pipes. The end. This is maybe 2 minutes into the game, so it's not a very good introduction. They actually bring this back when Ron is barfing up slugs, but it's equally arbitrary there. Of all the things to make gameplay out of. Challenging yet pointless, so ultimately baffling. There's a gnome throwing game. This is deceptively fun. You gain your momentum and launch the gnomes as far as you can or into bonus objects. The hitboxes are a bit arbitrary and the margin for error is almost non-existent in some circumstances, like with the bird bath, but I got lucky and in the first gnome throwing game got pretty well the highest score you possibly can get on the first go. It's also a bit baffling, but it works. It's tense. Timing it right for a perfect throw is satisfying, and surprisingly, as Ron says, it's really good fun. Then Quidditch makes its grand return, and it's as unchanged as sliced bread. You fly through rings, it gets faster and faster until you go to catch the snitch. You can't lose. The only thing you can do is go for the best time. The only substantial thing that changed was the catching minigame. It's no longer a bar and has been replaced by a manual catch the snitch minigame. It's just as fun as it was before. It's simple and mindless, but an enjoyable romp with real pick up and play quality, and the free flight is great. The only time you play it during the story mode is the part with the possessed bludger in the stands. I like all of the obstacles to dodge here. It really throws a wrench in the standard Quidditch routine, as well as the bludger in Hot Pursuit, and bashing Malfoy is never not fun. But I hit this weird glitch that made it almost impossible for me to catch the snitch. There would be a small window where I could catch it, and then the indicator would just not come up again. It ended up taking me 10 minutes more than it should have, so that was pretty balls, but the Quidditch in general is enjoyable yet simple. One more thing though, it should be mentioned that both the first game and Chamber of Secrets were fully voice acted in English, French, and Spanish. I used to play these games so much that I changed the language just to get some variance to the game. It doesn't really change anything other than the alt versions being slightly better acted, but in Chamber of Secrets there's this one thing that always stuck out to me. If you pull back at the beginning of a Quidditch match in both games, you'll do a flip, and the announcer will be like, "Yeah, that's awesome," but in Spanish in the second game, then we have the part where we're going to Hogwarts in the flying car and have to stay ahead of the train. This one's weird. Once again, it doesn't really build on anything, so it's just a gimmick. There are several times where you could have just flown away, so that's frustrating, but you collect speed boosts and later repair tokens, avoid obstacles, and keep your speed up so the train doesn't hit you. There are alternate routes, scraping against the walls slows you down, and so on. They tried to make this game more than it was, and I'm not gonna say it's bad, but it's just not particularly good either. It's just there, and in a way that's the worst it could be. There's just nothing to say about it. I guess the controls are fairly smooth, but the train catches up to you way too quickly. I don't know what to say. It's just kinda meh. We're still going though. Another disconnected mode are these slides. You maneuver yourself down these massive obstacle courses where you can only vaguely control your direction, so these are exactly what they want to be, but they still feel frustrating to control. Plus, you're under a strict time limit and have to restart if you fall off. This is consistently the minigame that I fail at the most. It's not bad, I just suck at it. Like the other minigames, it's basically okay, and that's as good as it needed to be. Then you have the chase minigames where it's entirely possible to outrun the person you're chasing. They're as good as they realistically can be. You just chase after them and try not to lose them. It's not rocket surgery. The one after you drink the polyjuice potion is weird because you can't jump, and on a side note, this is the peril that Slytherin kids have to go through to get to their common room every day.
I feel like going for a walk. Well, never fucking mind.
If you ever needed evidence that Hogwarts hates Slytherin, there's nothing to say about this. You're just running and trying not to fall too far behind, so you do need to do a perfect run, which can be frustrating, but all you're doing is holding forward until your hand starts to cramp. The end. You have the shooting gallery game back, which as I said last time is just a glorified point and click minigame. Aim and shoot, nothing more than that, and it's just as boring as you could imagine, but they do it too many times. I mean, they do it at all, which is too much, but you know what I mean. Potion mixing, which is just glorified QuickTime events. Hooray, he said disingenuously. Like the troll portion of the last game, you have exactly one instance of a forced chase, and while it's more tolerable than the last game, it's still an unnecessary load of bullshit that comes out of nowhere and leads to nothing, but at least getting caught is funny.
His eyes are as green as a fresh pickled toad. His hair is as dark as a blackboard. I wish she was mine, he's really divine. The hero who conquered the Dark Lord.
You'd think this is funny, but then I'd like to point out that this is a gift from a fully grown man. To a 12-year-old. I'll let you fill in the blanks.
And when I say it comes out of nowhere and leads to nothing, it literally comes out of nowhere after one of the gameplay sequences, and then it leads to absolutely nothing, like we just cut away to the next part of the story like nothing happened. What was even the point, other than padding the game out, and making Lockhart seem like a creep? There was no point, was there? There's this weird section where you have to get through floor traps on the way to Lockhart's office after he locks it. It's a game where the hitboxes on the floor panels are inexact and the timing is tight, so it's pretty obnoxious. Finally, the weirdest minigame I came across was at the farthest corner of the game world that you can possibly access. It's called Dean Thomas's Football Challenge, and it's a really janky minigame where you need to kick the football through a set of 10 posts. First of all, I had to look up who Dean Thomas even was because I had long forgotten. Apparently he was a fan of West Ham. Okay. Then I had to look up if he was even in the game. He's not. Anyway, the main issue with this minigame is that it requires you to accurately kick the football, and you'd have better luck threading a needle with your elbows. Your hitbox in relation to the ball is hard to accurately gauge, and the direction the ball will go might as well be randomized. You walk into it and it just goes wherever it wants, and Harry's movements aren't so accurate that something like this is easy to set up or line up, so it just takes a lot of effort and is maximum jank. But the really shitty thing is, it's completely optional, the only reward being every flavor beans, and you have to go out of your way to even find the game itself, so there's not even any point in complaining about it. It just exists. And it sucks. But it's cancelled out by pure redundancy, just like the previous sentence. That's it as far as gameplay gimmicks are concerned. I'm pretty sure. As a whole, Chamber of Secrets is a massive step up from the previous game because there are way more good to great different game modes, but the returning bad ones are still bad. So they made a concerted effort to improve, but it still feels like they fell into old habits. Still, I'd take gnome tossing and optional football any day over the minecart. Ugh. You have some good moments, albeit good moments that feel like an interlude from standard gameplay and don't really tie into anything, but good moments nonetheless. To tie it all up, let's talk about the bosses. They're all pretty much fought in the same way, just fire at them when they're vulnerable. If you count the possessed washing machine as a boss, just keep firing. Your minimum powered shots don't do much less damage than the maximum power shot. The Whomping Willow is damaged by getting close to it and firing in its mouth. I'll remind you that this is a tree. Shoot Peeves as soon as he's on screen, shoot the snake's head when it's sitting still, shoot the trees around Aragog. Professor Lockhart is just a standard wizard duel, but he has an instant kill attack. Once you're done with Lockhart, you go through a gauntlet that has to be done on one life bar, otherwise you have to do it again. Aside from more forced and even more obnoxious stealth, it's actually a pretty solid part of the game that provides a really good build up to the final boss while utilizing every main mechanic thus far in really inventive ways. Then finally with the Basilisk. Stage 1, shoot the inside of its mouth, and then Stage 2, use the Sword of Gryffindor to fire the teeth lasers back at its teeth. I have no words. Among all of these boss fights, it's pretty much a 50-50 split. Peeves is boring because it's a shooting gallery, the snake sucks because his attacks are way too fast to avoid, so I reliably die or almost die on this fight, and the Whomping Willow, well, there's just nothing to it. The Aragog boss fight is great because there's so much going on, and shooting the trees to subdue Aragog is an inventive way of fighting a boss for this game. Lockhart is a great boss fight basically because it's done in the best game mode, so it had no choice but to be good, plus it has extra mechanics for good measure. In this case, he sometimes fires the spell of Amnesia, Obliviate, an instant kill if it hits you.
Wait, hold up. So, Lockhart is a crack shot with an Amnesia spell, and he sent that Valentine's Day gift to Harry early. Oh my god. Oh my god! Lockhart is a kitty fiddler! And God knows how many times he's already gotten away with it, like, even without the amnesia spell. He's rich and famous. He, like, has the power to cover it up. Like, this isn't a joke! This is fucked up! He's basically like Wizard Harvey Weinstein!
Then we have the final boss, the Basilisk. For as easy as it is, in fact it might be the easiest boss in the game, it has a really good build and feels properly epic. Oh yeah, the washing machine boss fight is also a thing. I'd say the boss fights in this game are generally a net positive in spite of the shortcomings, if ever there was a phrase to describe this game. But I do have some other problems with this game that popped up, but they're probably unique to me. So there's a bit of a story behind this. So while I was recording this game, I finished one of the sessions, and after the video finished exporting, I put my computer to sleep mode so I could have dinner. But when I came back, however, my computer glitched out and it wouldn't come out of sleep mode, forcing me to hard reset my computer. When I did, I came back to check the exported video and it was corrupted. And I remembered at that point that I stupidly deleted the source video after it exported to save space, so I lost an hour and a half worth of gameplay. Caught in a tough spot, I decided to power through the game on a separate file, skipping past any of the side content and running through it faster than Chariots of Fire on regular speed. Because of this odd set of circumstances, I ended up noticing a few flaws that I wouldn't have otherwise noticed. First of all, you can't skip dialogue properly. Most of the voiced dialogue in this game comes with an animation, and until the animation finishes, you can't skip the line, like this is some theme park or something. One would assume this has to do with some sort of loading issue. Regardless, it's a real penis in the anus when I have no interest in what these characters have to say, but I'm forced to sit through some or even all of what they have to say because I have to wait for the animation to finish. Along with that issue comes another similar issue. You can't cancel out of a minigame once you start it. If you accidentally press yes to continue or restart, you have no choice but to keep going until time runs out. When I'm just trying to get through and have no interest in doing barely connected bullshit with no way to quit if I accidentally continue or retry, that's just asking for frustration. Would adding a quit minigame option be so hard? That said, these and all of the other issues I've mentioned are relatively minor and situational, and I'm willing to forgive a lot of this game's flaws because for all of its insubstantiality, 4 to 6 hours specifically, and dumb gameplay gimmicks, for all of its questionable design and terrible graphics, for all of its atrocious voice acting and lack of focus, I can say with certainty that this game is much better than the sum of its parts and easily feels like a significant improvement over the first game. It's not one of my favorite PS1 games, but given how I was expecting a borderline disaster like Philosopher's Stone, Chamber of Secrets really rather surprised me in a number of ways. I mentioned in my Sorcerer's Stone video how I felt like that game got the feel of Harry Potter down much better than any of the later games in the series without having to create a virtual one-to-one recreation of Hogwarts, and that's certainly true here as well. With all of the explorative elements and mystery, it gets the spirit of Harry Potter down pat. It feels whimsical and mysterious. It feels like you're exploring this giant mysterious castle full of secrets. While Chamber of Secrets PS1 is old and rough around the edges, this is what I think about when somebody mentions a Harry Potter tie-in game, and it needs neither graphics or accuracy. But I do want to touch on one more thing, easily my favorite part of the game by a mile, and it's such a small thing. One of the secrets in the upper castle involves climbing to what one would assume would be the absolute peak of the castle, so you walk outside and there it is, just a PS1 sunset. And this section has always stuck out to me as such a peaceful, serene place, and is probably the most memorable place in the entire game for me. It just makes me all warm and fuzzy inside. This may sound odd, and I'm not trying to play this up to be funny. I mean it when I say this. Something about climbing this section of the castle onto the roof and looking off at that flat but oddly beautiful sunset, something about it just makes me think everything's gonna be okay. I know that sounds weird, but there's just such a certain quaintness and serenity to this part of the game that stuck with me my entire life. Everything can be going to shit, but that one part of the game reminds me that it's okay. You know that feeling of watching the first sunset of summer? That's what this makes me feel. It's such a tiny detail, but it's one that stuck with me for years. I don't know. I just love it. It's just bliss.
I definitely don't think this game is some masterpiece, but I was expecting something much worse than what I got, and I'm satisfied with what I did get. So much so that I even 100%ed this game.
It's funny because there's this mysterious door to the left of you as you're making your way to the Wizard Duels, and it clearly won't open up until you 100%ed the game, because it's the only locked door you can access after the story end cuts off most of the castle. For years I thought it was going to be something like a super hard Wizard Duel with Dumbledore or something, but when I did eventually beat it years ago, I didn't even see what was in the room because it's so empty. Your focus should be on the table in the middle with a very easily missed scrapbook on it. From there, the book gives you access to concept art? I mean, props to them for giving you a 100% reward, but first of all, why is the art style so much better than anything in the game here? But second of all, and more importantly, that's it? That's all I get?
Say goodbye. A vodka cadaver. Nope, that was definitely not an overreaction.
This video was brought to you in part by my lovely patrons. I thank you for your continued support. If you want to become a patron for TGX, the link is in the description.
Harry, wait!
What? Speak up, Hermione!
Look! That mandrake's being attacked by those giant slugs!
Yes, what about Gryffindor? Go on. Fuck you.